book provided by the author. Hi everyone! So today I have a quick book review for you all today. Three Ruined Realms is a fantasy book by Anne W.T. This is a self-published or an indie book and is the first book in a series that is currently titled the Hollowed War series. Now, I don't have a physical copy of this book, and I normally like to hold them up when doing these reviews, but I did read an ebook version of this, and honestly, holding the book up for an entire video, my arms do get tired because even though these videos are only like 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes long, it ends up taking me like an hour to film these things because I ramble on and then I have a million cuts every 2 seconds. So this is going to be a spoiler-free review, and first, let's talk about the story. The story follows the main character, Kaden. She is heir to the throne and set to re-establish the Divine Order and bring back its ancient creatures, the dragons, which had disappeared from existence a long time ago. The Divine Order and these ancient creatures protected the realm and maintained peace between the kingdoms for generations. But when this order lost its power and their ancient creatures, those times of peace and prosperity started to end. Now Kaden is on a quest to return the Divine Order to power, regain the lost creatures, and re-establish the Orifice Knights to save her kingdom. However, when the fate of the entire mortal realm comes into play, Kaden and her Orifice Knights, along with their dragons, are the only ones who can save the world. Overall, I will say I enjoyed the story quite a bit, even if it does have overused and typical elements you find in fantasy books like dragons, an evil lord, and a chosen savior who's the only one who can save humanity. But looking beyond that, the way the story unfolds kept my attention and I found it to be fairly interesting. The story actually reminded me a lot of an Arthurian legend, and maybe that's because it focuses so much on knights, but since I am a fan of King Arthur and the stories that follow him, this was definitely a positive, in my opinion. Just as important as having an engaging story is to also have interesting characters. And here, I'm a little bit more torn. Most of the characters I definitely enjoyed about reading, but there were a few characters that either annoyed me or I found to be a little boring. On one end, you have characters that I absolutely loved reading about. Bash, one of the Orifice Knights, was definitely my favorite character in this story. And he has a really interesting twist at the end that I did not see coming, and the way this impacts the story was really well done and really gripped my attention as well. But don't worry, no spoilers. Then on the other end, you have this dynamic between two characters, Leander and Saren, which I found just to be incredibly annoying. By themselves, they are fairly interesting characters and well written. It's just when they engage with each other, wasn't a fan at all. And then of course you have the main character, Kaden, which with her, again, I'm a little torn. She is unbelievably driven to the point where absolutely nothing is going to stop her from accomplishing her goals. This can be a little overdone, especially in some parts where it comes off as annoyingly obsessive. But since it does fit in with her character, I suppose it does make sense. She also comes off as a little too perfect. She doesn't really have any flaws, at least no flaws that come up in this book, which makes it hard as the reader to relate to her and really to care about what she's trying to accomplish when everything she does, it seems to be perfect. I prefer my main characters to have some flaws and not to be infallible like she is. And I gotta say, I definitely enjoyed reading about her early on in the story, but as it progressed, I just didn't care as much, and I found her to be far less interesting, especially towards the end of the book. Not that she's a poorly written character, but it's just the fact that she comes off as too perfect. It really made me lose interest in what she was dealing with. Then you have the Evil Lord, and it's really interesting because in this book, it hardly makes an appearance at all. In fact, I think his name only comes up like once or twice in the book, and it's really hard to care about, you know, this evil lord and all the bad that's going to happen when he plays such a slight part in this book. And sure, it's definitely foreshadowing things that are going to happen probably in later books, but in this book it was kind of, I don't know, it kind of came off as pointless. And that's actually kind of very similar to the dragons in this book as well. The dragons are kind of just there in the background, they don't really do anything, and I'm sure in later books they're going to play a very important role, but in this story, not so much. So it's hard to care about the dragons and the Evil Lord. Mainly in this book, you're going to worry about the main character, Caden, and her Orphis Knights, which, luckily, they do help carry the story, and for the most part, kept me engaged. The pacing of this book is fairly slow, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but rather in a more deliberate way where the story is set up, the characters are set up, and the setting is set up in intricate detail. And this is something I think really helps this book. The world, the story, the characters, or at least most of the characters, were all very well written, very well fleshed out, and really helped me enjoy reading this book. That being said, it is painfully clear that this is the first book in what will become a series, so don't go into this book thinking you're going to get ultimate closure or that everything's going to end up all nice and neat at the end, because it doesn't. It's very much foreshadowing things and events that are going to happen probably later on. But for the most part, the closure you get in this book is, I would say, satisfying. One thing I am worried about, though, is this series becoming too big. Because based off of this book, the author takes a very long time to establish the characters, the setting, the story, all of that. And this can be a pretty slippery slope where future books keep building upon things that happened in prior books without advancing the story forward, at least at a good enough pace. And this creates an overly bloated series, which honestly is something other large series, especially in fantasy, kind of have trouble with. I'm not saying this is going to happen, I just can kind of see it happening based off of what I've read in this book. And if I'm being perfectly honest, the last thing I need right now is another 10-plus book series to read. Overall, I will say this was a pretty good book, especially if you're into slower-paced and deliberate fantasy books. And if you like Arthurian legend, I definitely think you would like this book. But if you are into more fast-paced reads, you might get a little bored reading this. Although the story is slow-moving, it is still fairly interesting, I found, and most of the characters are fairly interesting as well. But I definitely can see how some readers could consider this a book a little bit of a slog to get through. But again, I really thought that slow pacing really helped establish this story, its characters, and its setting, and really helped me enjoy the story. And nothing comes off as rushed, which tends to happen with a lot of other books I read, especially where the pacing is slow 1 second, and then all of a sudden the pacing is really fast. At least the pacing throughout this story is very even. It is just a little bit slow. And that is my review of 3 Ruined Realms by Ann W.T. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye!